Hey everyone, this is Jungkook. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. I never thought I would talk about this moment publicly. For a long time, I kept it buried, thinking silence would make it disappear. But life has a way of reminding you that unspoken truths echo louder inside than words ever could. This is not a story about fame or music or success. It's about a single moment one night when I almost did something I can never take back. And the person who stopped me wasn't my manager or a producer or even a family member. It was Taehyung. I remember the night clearly. Soul was asleep, but my mind wasn't. The city lights outside my window looked like sparks fading in the distance, and for the first time in years, I felt smaller than the world I'd built. The applause, the interviews, the noise, none of it could drown the quiet ache that had taken root in my chest. I had been running on empty, pretending to be fine for everyone except myself. Sometimes success traps you in a version of yourself you can't escape from. I was supposed to be preparing for another shoot, but instead, I was sitting on the cold floor of my studio, staring at a half-finished lyric I couldn't bring myself to complete. It said, "If I disappear, will anyone notice?" I had written it as a metaphor for loneliness and fame, but that night, it didn't feel like poetry. It felt like a question I was actually asking myself. My phone buzzed once, twice. I ignored it, then again, and again. I looked. It was Taehyung. He rarely calls late unless something's wrong. So when I picked up, his tone wasn't cheerful. It was steady, too steady. "Where are you?" he asked. I told him I was at the studio. He paused. "Don't do anything stupid, Jungkook." Those words cut through the fog. My chest tightened. I hadn't said anything, yet somehow he knew. He always had that intuition, the kind that doesn't come from logic, but from love. Within 20 minutes, he was there. Hoodie, slippers, hair messy from sleep. He didn't say much when he walked in, just looked around, saw the lyrics on the floor, and sat down beside me. For a while, neither of us spoke. He didn't need to fill the silence, and maybe that's what saved me. Because silence from someone who truly understands you isn't emptiness, it's presence. Finally, he said, "You know, I've been there too." I didn't look up. He continued, "The nights when everything looks perfect on the outside, but inside, you just want to shut it all off." That broke me. I hadn't realized how heavy I had been carrying it until someone else admitted they knew the same weight. We stayed there for hours, talking about nothing and everything, music, childhood, the loneliness of being loved by millions but known by so few. He told me something I still carry. You can't let your worst night decide your story. Let your brothers help you rewrite it. And that's when I realized he wasn't just talking as a friend. He was reminding me that BTS wasn't built just for the stage. It was built for nights like this. The next morning, Jimin showed up with breakfast. He didn't ask questions. He just smiled and said, "Hyung told me you didn't sleep. Namjoon sent a text. You're allowed to rest too, you know." Yoongi called later, saying nothing but, "Come to the studio when you can. We'll work through it in music." Jin sent a picture of food with, "Eat this before I scold you." And Hobie, of course, sent a voice note, all bright energy and warmth. "The world is better with you in it. Kooky." That's when it hit me. I wasn't just being held up by one friend that night. I was being carried by 6. Every word, every message, every small act reminded me that love doesn't always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as a phone call, a text, or a shared silence on the studio floor. For weeks after that, I kept thinking about what Taehyung said. Don't let your worst night decide your story. It became my mantra. I started writing again, not about fame or pressure, but about healing, about being seen, about how sometimes the people closest to you can sense your breaking point before you even do. That's real brotherhood, when someone knows the unspoken chapters of your life and refuses to let you close the book too soon. I didn't talk about this publicly because I didn't want sympathy. I wanted to understand why someone like me, surrounded by love, success, fans, everything, could still feel so lost. The answer didn't come overnight. It came slowly in the way the others looked at me during rehearsals, in the laughter that came back piece by piece. It came when Jimin nudged me after a show and said, "You look lighter tonight." It wasn't about being happy all the time. It was about learning to reach out before the silence became too loud. I realized something. Strength isn't pretending everything's fine. Strength is letting someone see you when you're not. And Taehyung saw me. Looking back now, that night could have ended differently. I could have made a decision I'd regret forever. But Taehyung's timing wasn't luck. It was connection, the kind that only years of shared life can create. People think we're just colleagues, teammates, performers, but behind the lights, we're a family built not by blood, but by years of watching each other fall and stand again. Sometimes I wonder how he knew, how he sensed something was wrong before I said a word. Maybe that's what love looks like in friendship, recognizing the storm before it hit. And maybe that's what makes BTS what it is. Not the fame, not the charts, but the quiet acts of saving each other when no one's watching. If you're listening right now and you've ever had a night like that, when everything felt too heavy, please remember this. There's always someone who will sit beside you on that floor, even if you don't ask them to. Sometimes you just have to answer the call. And to Taehyung, if you ever hear this, thank you. You didn't just stop me from doing something stupid. You reminded me why I'm still here to sing, to laugh, to live. You reminded me that life isn't about being perfect. It's about being held by people who refuse to let you fall alone. That night didn't break me. It rebuilt me. And for that, I'll spend the rest of my life making music that tells the truth that even in the darkest hour, love, friendship, and understanding can pull you back into the light. After that night, something in me changed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden burst of clarity or tears of revelation. It was quieter than that. Like the soft light that enters a room before sunrise. I started to see the people around me differently, to listen more carefully, to notice how fragile even the strongest hearts can be when nobody's looking. Taehyung's words didn't leave me. They echoed in every rehearsal, every pause between songs, every time I saw a member drift off into thought. We were all carrying something, all pretending to be okay for the sake of each other and the millions watching. But beneath that, there was an unspoken understanding if one of us stumbled, the rest would catch him. A few days later, I found myself walking into Yoongi's studio. It smelled like coffee and late nights, the kind of place where words turn into truth. He was working on something soft piano, strings, something that felt like calm water. I sat down quietly, and he didn't ask why I was there. He just handed me a pair of headphones and said, "Listen, the track wasn't finished, but there was something about the melody. It sounded like breathing after holding your breath too long. You can't force peace," he said. "You just make space for it." I think that was his way of telling me he understood, even if we didn't talk about that night directly. That's the thing about Yoongi. He speaks through sound, not sentences. Later, I went to practice. Jimin was already there, stretching in the corner, humming under his breath. He looked up, smiled, and said, "You're early. That's new." I laughed, but inside, I felt something shift. I watched the way he moved, careful, precise, full of control, but also how he carried an invisible heaviness. He'd always been like that, graceful on stage, but with a quiet ache in his eyes. I wondered how many nights he'd felt like I did. How many times he'd danced through pain just to make others smile. That realization made me respect him even more. At lunch, Hobie joined us. He sat across from me with his usual brightness, but I noticed the small things, the tired eyes, the way his laughter didn't reach as far as it used to. I guess that's what happens when you start paying attention. You see how everyone's hiding something, but Hobie's gift is different. He doesn't hide his pain, he transforms it. Every smile is rebellion. Every joke is a bridge between sadness and hope. I told him, "You're the reason so many people still believe in happiness." He looked at me for a moment and said, "Then keep believing with me." Namjoon called me later that night. He said he'd been thinking about what Taehyung did and how lucky I was. "We're all strong," he said, "but even strong people need someone to interrupt their darkness." He told me something I'll never forget. The danger isn't in feeling broken, it's in pretending you're not. His voice was calm but firm, like he was speaking from a place that had seen both storms and light. That's how Namjoon is. He doesn't fix you, he reminds you how to rebuild yourself. A week after that, Jin invited everyone over. It wasn't a planned thing, just dinner, laughter, warmth. But looking around the table, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Belonging, real belonging. Jin was scolding Taehyung for burning the meat. Yoongi was pretending not to care. Jimin was giggling uncontrollably, and Hobi was narrating it all like a chaotic variety show host. For a moment, I just sat there and watched them. These men, these brothers had seen me at my worst and still chose to stay. That's what family is. Not perfection, not constant harmony, but the willingness to sit beside someone through both silence and storm. That night, after everyone left, I helped Jin clean up. He looked at me and said, "You know, I'm proud of you." I asked him why. He smiled. "Because you let someone help you. That's harder than helping others." I didn't have an answer. I just nodded, because he was right. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you need saving. Over the next few weeks, I started writing again. Not for an album, not for anyone, just for me. The words came slower, but they were honest this time. Lines about exhaustion, about fear, about gratitude. I found myself writing one line over and over. He stopped me before I disappeared. Maybe it was about Taehyung, but it was also about all of them. Each member, in their own way, had reached into the darkness and pulled me back. As the days passed, something strange happened. I started to notice life again. The way sunlight hits the mirrors in our practice room, the way the city smells after rain, the way fans write messages that sound like love letters from people I've never met. I began to realize how much I had been missing while chasing perfection. Perfection is a trap. It keeps you from living. What Taehyung did that night wasn't just saving me, it was giving me permission to be imperfect again. One evening, I visited Taehyung. He was painting, lost in colors. I sat beside him, watching the slow movements of his brush. "You know you saved me, right?" I said quietly. He didn't stop painting. "No," he replied. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you that you could." That's the thing about Taehyung. He doesn't want credit. He just wants truth. He once told me that art isn't about creating something beautiful. It's about revealing what's real. And maybe that's what that night did. It stripped everything down until only the real parts of me remained. The scared part, the hopeful part, the part that still believes in love, in music, in people. Since then, I've tried to live differently, to answer calls, to ask how others are really doing, to slow down and breathe before the pressure turns into silence again. Every time I look at the members, I see pieces of myself reflected back. The strength in Yoongi's patience, the empathy in Jimin's eyes, the joy in Hobi's laughter, the wisdom in Namjoon's calm, the steadiness in Jin's care, and the quiet courage in Taehyung's heart. I used to think BTS was built on ambition. Now I know it was built on mercy. The mercy we show each other when the world becomes too loud. The mercy of listening without judging. The mercy of saying, stay, when someone wants to disappear. That's what Taehyung gave me that night. Not pity, not advice, mercy. And that's what I want to give to anyone listening. If you've ever felt on the edge, if you've ever stared into the dark and thought the world would be better off without you, please hold on a little longer. Reach out, answer the call, let someone see you, because you're not alone, even when you think you are. We're all just trying to practice being the people we hope to become. And sometimes the person who helps you practice shows up in the form of a friend who refuses to let you go quietly. Taehyung was that person for me, and because of him, I learned that even the darkest night can end with light if someone cares enough to walk through it with you. The next few months moved like a blur, but not the kind that used to consume me when I was lost in schedules, rehearsals, and flights. This was different. It was slower, quieter, grounded. Every day felt like a small reminder that I was still here, that life didn't have to be loud to be meaningful. I found myself sitting in cafes I used to rush past, watching people instead of scrolling through my phone. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since we debuted. It wasn't about writing songs. It was about finding my voice when there was no melody attached. And somewhere between those pages, I began to understand what Taehyung had really done that night. He hadn't just saved me, he had paused me long enough to remember who I was before everything got complicated. One day, I met up with Namjoon at Han River. It was cold, and the water looked like glass reflecting the overcast sky. He was sitting with his usual coffee and a small notebook. We didn't plan to meet, it just happened. Maybe it was intuition again, the same kind Taehyung had that night. We sat in silence for a while, watching the wind move across the surface of the water. "You look lighter," he said eventually. I smiled a little. "I feel real again," he nodded. That's what healing does. It doesn't fix you, it makes you real again. That sentence stayed with me. I think that's what the last few months had been about, becoming real again. Later that week, I was at the practice room with Jimin. We were reviewing choreography, but halfway through, he stopped and just stared at me. "You're different," he said. "Your energy feels calm." I laughed. "You make it sound like I used to be chaotic." He grinned. "You were." Then he added, "But now it's like you're not performing your emotions anymore. You're feeling them." That hit me. Because it was true. For so long, I had been living like everything was a performance, even my sadness, even my joy. I had learned to hide behind rhythm, to translate pain into perfection. But healing isn't choreography. It's clumsy and raw and full of pauses. We practiced late that night, and when the music stopped, we just sat on the floor. Jimin looked tired, but peaceful. "Do you ever get scared it'll all disappear one day?" he asked. I thought about it for a while. Sometimes, I admitted, "But maybe that's what makes it beautiful." He nodded. "Yeah. Like a song that ends but still echoes after it's gone." That's the thing about Jimin. He always finds poetry in places other people overlook. And in that moment, I realized how much strength it takes to stay gentle in a world that keeps demanding hardness. Yoongi called me a few days later. He doesn't usually call, he texts. But this time, he wanted to talk. "I listened to that demo you sent," he said. "It's different." I waited, unsure if that was good or bad. "Different in a good way," he added. "You're not chasing perfection in it, you're chasing truth." I smiled quietly. That's what Taehyung told me to do. Yoongi paused, then said, "Good, keep that. That's how you stay alive in this business." His voice was rough, but I could hear the care under it. Yoongi doesn't say, "I care about you" directly. He just makes sure you never forget how to breathe. The next time I saw Taehyung, we didn't talk about that night. We didn't need to. He just smiled when he saw me and said, "You finally got some color back." I laughed. "Was I gray before?" He nodded. "You were fading." I wanted to tell him that he had been the reason I didn't vanish entirely, but the words didn't come out. Instead, I said, "I've been writing again." His eyes lit up. "Good. Then you're doing what you were made to do." One evening, all of us gathered in the studio for dinner and some downtime. We ordered way too much food: chicken, tteokbokki, pizza. Hobie was doing his silly dances. Jin was pretending to be angry because someone ate before he said, "Let's eat." And Namjoon was giving one of his philosophical talks about how the true meaning of friendship is alignment. Everyone laughed. But at one point, I just stopped and looked around. These people had seen my light and my shadow, my rise and my collapse, and they stayed. There was something sacred in that realization. You can't fake that kind of bond. I caught Taehyung's eyes across the room. He smiled, like he knew what I was thinking. That's the unspoken language we share, the one built from years of shared silence and chaos. Sometimes I wonder how many storms each of us has weathered alone without telling the others. But that's what makes this connection so powerful. It's not about constant communication, it's about recognition, the kind that says, I've been there too. That night, when I got home, I couldn't sleep. I opened my journal and wrote, maybe healing doesn't mean you stop hurting. Maybe it means you stop hurting alone. I thought about that for a long time, about how I had always tried to be strong for everyone, even when my own walls were crumbling. But real strength isn't about endurance, it's about honesty. It's the courage to say, I'm not okay, and trust that someone will still stay. Taehyung gave me that trust. Jimin gave me understanding. Namjoon gave me wisdom. Yoongi gave me calm. Hobi gave me joy. Jin gave me warmth. Each of them gave me a reason to believe in tomorrow again. I used to think our success came from discipline and vision, but now I know it came from something deeper, our ability to save each other when the cameras aren't rolling. A few weeks later, I went back to that same studio floor where everything had almost ended. The lights were dim, the air smelled like dust and sweat, and my reflection looked different now, less broken, more human. I sat down in the same spot and whispered a quiet thank you. Not just to Taehyung, but to every version of myself that survived long enough to be saved. The truth is, we don't always get second chances. Some people never get that knock on the door or that phone call at the right moment. And that's why I share this not to glorify pain, but to remind you that even the smallest act of care can alter the course of someone's life. Sometimes it takes just one person who refuses to let you go. For me, that person was Taehyung. If you're listening to this right now, maybe this is your call, the one that interrupts your silence before it becomes something irreversible. Maybe it's time to pause, to breathe, to remember that you're still here for a reason. Because the truth is, none of us are meant to face life alone. And the moment you let someone in, you start finding your way back. That's what I learned from him. That's what I'll never forget. After that dinner with the members, something inside me began to quietly rebuild. It wasn't an explosion of joy or some big revelation. It was subtle, almost invisible at first, like the way dawn creeps in before the world notices. I started to wake up earlier, to breathe slower, to see color again in things I used to overlook. The world hadn't changed, but my eyes had. And maybe that's the real kind of healing, the kind that doesn't erase the past, but helps you look at it differently. I remember one morning walking through the quiet streets near the Han River. The air was cold enough to make my breath visible, and I found myself thinking about how just months ago, I couldn't even feel it. The cold, the air, the quiet, all of it had felt like background noise. I didn't have the energy to notice. But now, it felt like proof that I was still alive. I stopped at a small cafe, ordered black coffee, and sat near the window. No phone, no headphones, no distraction, just the sound of people living. It's strange how peace can sound like footsteps and laughter in the distance. That's when I saw a message from Taehyung. No words, just a picture of his dog sleeping with a caption, "He trusts me even when I do nothing." I smiled. That's his way of saying he's checking in. I texted back, "That's what friendship is too," he replied with a heart emoji. No more words. We didn't need them. Later that day, we met at the studio. He was working on a new song, soft guitar, gentle tempo. He handed me his headphones and said, "Listen to this. It's about staying." I listened. The lyrics weren't polished, but the message was pure. Don't walk away from yourself when you're tired. Sit down beside your pain. Rest with it. I looked at him and said, "You wrote this after that night, didn't you?" He nodded, not looking up. Yeah, it was the only way I knew how to talk about it. That's Taehyung. He speaks best through art. Every word, every note, a quiet conversation with what he can't say out loud. That song became something personal between us, a reminder that silence could heal if you stayed long enough to hear what it was trying to tell you. We never released it. Maybe we never will. It belongs to that night, to that version of us. A few weeks later, Jimin came over. He brought food, like always. He's the kind of person who doesn't need to ask how you're doing. He can taste it in the air. "You've been quiet lately," he said, handing me a drink. "I'm okay," I replied. He looked at me for a long time and said, "Okay, doesn't always mean healed." I didn't know what to say. So he smiled softly and added, "But it's a start." That's what I love about him. He never demands an explanation. He just makes space for you until the words come naturally. Yoonji visited a few days later too. He brought his laptop and said, "Help me with this beat." I told him I didn't feel inspired. He smirked. "You don't need inspiration, just honesty." He pressed play. It was heavy, raw, full of emotion that hadn't yet found a name. He said, "Music's the only place where pain sounds beautiful. Don't waste yours by hiding it." I think that's when I realized pain can be recycled into purpose if you're brave enough to face it. Namjoon called again that week. He was out walking somewhere, probably, with his headphones, looking at trees like they're old friends. "I've been thinking about that night," he said, "about how one person's instinct can save another's life. That's rare, you know? That's sacred." I stayed quiet. "It made me think," he continued, "maybe that's why BTS works. Because we're not just connected through music, we're connected through intuition." I thought about that long after we hung up. He was right. There's something beyond words that ties us together. Something that can't be rehearsed or explained. Jin called too, in his usual way, half joking, half wise. "Stop getting too serious, Jungkook," he said. "The world already has enough philosophers. Just eat well and smile once in a while." I laughed, but I knew what he meant. Life isn't supposed to be all lessons in healing. Sometimes it's just laughter in a kitchen filled with burnt food. Then there's Hobie. He dropped by one afternoon, full of light as usual. "Come dance," he said. "No cameras, no pressure, just us." I hadn't danced freely in months, but that day I did. The music wasn't planned, the moves weren't perfect, and for once I didn't care. I just moved. He watched me for a bit, then smiled. "See? That's you, not the performer, the person." That moment reminded me that joy doesn't have to be loud. It can be quiet, effortless, natural. Sometimes healing isn't about talking, it's about being seen without needing to explain. Each of them, in their own way, helped me remember what it means to be human again. Jin's humor, Namjoon's calm, Yoongi's honesty, Hobie's warmth, Jimin's empathy, and Taehyung's intuition. They didn't just stop me from falling, they taught me how to stand again. That night, I sat alone on my balcony, looking up at the sky. It was clear, no clouds, no noise, just stars. I thought about how many people look up at the same sky, lost in their own versions of pain. And I realized something. Sometimes the universe saves you through people. Not angels, not miracles, just people who decide to show up. That's what Taehyung did. That's what they all did. If I hadn't answered that call, I might not be here to tell you this, but I did. And because of that, I'm still breathing, still creating, still learning to live one honest day at a time. So if you're listening now and you're standing on the edge of your own silence, pick up the phone, text someone, step outside, let the world see you again. Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting to remind you that you still matter. That night may have been the darkest chapter of my story, but it became the reason I learned how to write new ones. And every new day since then has been a continuation of that same miracle, the miracle of staying. It's strange how healing doesn't happen all at once. It's not a switch you flip or a single sunrise that washes everything clean. It's more like the tide coming in, pulling back, leaving traces of salt and sand that remind you where you've been. That's how it felt in the months after that night. I wasn't fixed. I was learning to live with the cracks, to make peace with the sound they made when light passed through them. And somehow, that felt enough. One morning, I woke up before dawn. The house was silent, and for the first time in years, I didn't reach for my phone. I just sat there, watching the faint blue light slip across the floor. I thought about how many mornings I'd wasted rushing to prove, to perform, to stay relevant. But that day, I didn't rush. I made coffee, opened my journal, and wrote one simple line. I'm still here because someone cared enough to stop me. That sentence broke me in the best way, because it was true. Later that week, I went to visit Taehyung. It wasn't planned. I just ended up outside his place, the way gravity pulls you toward the person who once pulled you out of the dark. He opened the door, surprised but smiling. You look awake, he said. I laughed. I finally slept. We sat on his couch, surrounded by his paintings and that quiet music he always has playing soft jazz, timeless, effortless. I told him I'd been thinking about that night. He didn't flinch. You don't owe me gratitude, he said. You just owe yourself gentleness. We talked for hours, but it wasn't heavy. It was simple. About food, about memories, about how strange it is that we've grown up under such bright lights, yet learned to heal in the shadows. At one point, he said something I'll never forget. You know why I called you that night? I had a dream that you disappeared. I stared at him, stunned. It didn't feel like a dream, he continued. It felt like a warning. I didn't know what to say. Sometimes fate speaks softly through the people who know your heart better than you do. After that, we started spending more time together again. Not as performers, but as people. We'd go out for coffee, walk around without disguises, talk about art and fear, and the weirdness of being loved by millions but not always by yourself. He told me, you're not supposed to save the world every day, Jungkook. Some days, it's enough to save yourself. And that line became something I whispered to myself on hard days. Yoongi came to visit one evening. He brought his laptop again, saying he was working on a new concept for a track about healing. You want to add something, he asked? I hesitated. What if it's too personal? He smiled, eyes half tired but kind. That's what makes it worth listening to. So I did. I added a verse about silence, about how the quietest nights can hold the loudest truths. When we played it back, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The music said it all. Hobie heard it later and said, this song feels alive. That's what he always says when something connects. He told me he wanted to choreograph something simple for it. Not perfect, just honest, he said. So we met in the practice room one night. Lights dim, floor creaking under our steps. The moves weren't sharp or grand, they were slow, human, fragile. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was performing. I felt like I was breathing through movement. Afterward, Hobie hugged me and said, this is what art is supposed to do. It keeps us here. Namjoon dropped by the next day. He'd heard about the song too. You know, he said, there's something sacred about letting pain turn into sound. It's like giving your scars a language. He looked at me for a long time and added, that night could have been your ending. But instead, it became your verse. I nodded, unable to speak. He smiled softly. That's what love between brothers does. It turns tragedies into testimonies. And Jin, he was the last to hear it. He called me right after listening and said, you sound happy again. I told him I was trying. He replied, trying is enough. That's what people forget. It's such a simple sentence, but from him, it carried the weight of truth. Trying is enough. It doesn't have to be flawless. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It just has to be real. That weekend, we all met again. No cameras, no schedule, just us. The 7 of us sitting on the floor of the old studio where it all began. There was something poetic about being back there where dreams started, where hearts almost broke, where life quietly continued. Taehyung sat beside me, strumming a guitar. Yoongi was mixing something quietly on his laptop. Hobi was humming. Jimin was leaning on Namjoon's shoulder, eyes half closed. Jin was cooking something on a small stove, laughing at his own jokes. And I just sat there, listening to their voices, to the warmth in the room, to the proof that I was still here. For the first time in forever, I didn't feel like I had to earn that right. Sometimes, survival doesn't look like strength. It looks like sitting in a room full of people who refuse to let you forget you belong there. That's what BTS is to me now. Not fame, not history, not even legacy. It's home. The kind that finds you even when you're lost. When I left that night, I looked back at them one last time. The laughter, the light, the love, it all hit me at once. And I realized Taehyung didn't just stop me from doing something stupid that night. He gave me back my future, a future that now belongs not just to me, but to all of us who keep choosing to stay, no matter how dark the night gets. If you're listening now, maybe this is your reminder too. Don't give up before the miracle happens. Sometimes it takes just one voice calling your name in the dark to remind you you're still meant to be here. And when that voice comes, let it in. Because love, real love, the kind that saves, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a friend whispering, "Don't do anything stupid." And that whisper can echo for the rest of your life. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight spilling softly through the curtains and the sound of birds outside my window, a sound I hadn't really noticed in years. It's strange how the simplest things feel new when your heart finally starts to heal. I went downstairs, expecting to find my mom in the kitchen, but she wasn't there. On the table was a small note. Went to the market. Make yourself something to eat. There's fresh fruit in the fridge. Her handwriting was steady, kind, exactly the same as when she used to leave me notes before school. I held the paper for a moment, smiling, realizing that love often hides in the smallest gestures. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat outside on the porch, watching the morning unfold. The world was slow and kind that day, like it knew I needed stillness. For years, I had filled every silence with noise. Rehearsals, interviews, new projects, endless movement. But silence isn't emptiness. Sometimes it's where the truth lives. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Jimin. "Your mom sent me a photo of her garden this morning. She said the flowers bloomed early this year." I looked at the message for a long time. It was simple, but it meant everything. She texted him again, not out of obligation, but out of care. My heart swelled with gratitude for the way she never let love die quietly. I replied, "She said she'll teach you how to grow them next time you visit." He sent a smile emoji and a single word, "Promise." I didn't realize it, but I was smiling too. Later that day, I visited the old practice room in the city, the one where we used to train before everything changed. It was smaller than I remembered, a little dusty, but it felt sacred. I walked to the corner where Jimin and I used to rehearse late at night, where we collapsed laughing after nailing a move or argue about the rhythm until sunrise. I stood there quietly and placed my hand on the wall. The faint echoes of our younger selves still lived there. Every scratch, every stain, every reflection of sweat and hope was still telling our story. I sat on the floor and just breathed. I thought about everything, the distance, the pride, the years of not talking, the reunion, my mom's tears, and it hit me all at once. Forgiveness isn't about who was right or wrong. It's about recognizing that everyone did the best they could with what they had at the time. We were young, overwhelmed, scared, trying to carry dreams that felt too heavy for our shoulders. And yet, somehow, we made it. I left the studio that evening and walked along the Han River. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. I remembered how we used to come here after long practice days, sitting in silence, sometimes too tired to speak, sometimes laughing until our throats hurt. I could almost hear Jimin's voice beside me, teasing, thoughtful, full of light. I closed my eyes and let the wind hit my face. My mom called then. "Where are you?" she asked. "By the river," I said. "The same one you used to worry about me walking alone at night." She laughed softly. "You're not alone," she said. "You never were." Her words lingered long after the call ended, because she was right. Even when it felt like we were drifting apart, some invisible thread kept us tied together, the shared memories, the songs, the unspoken love. That thread was what pulled me back now, to this moment, to gratitude. When I got home, she was in the living room, folding laundry while watching an old variety show. I sat beside her. For a while, neither of us said anything. Then she said quietly, "He looked thinner than I remembered. Make sure he eats when he visits next time." I smiled. "You're still taking care of him, huh?" She shrugged. "Mothers don't stop caring just because children grow apart. They just pray harder." I leaned back, letting her words settle into me. It wasn't just about her or Jimin, it was about all of them. Every member had a place in her prayers. Every bond, every scar, every laugh she had witnessed from the sidelines, she carried it all. Maybe that's why she cried that day. Because seeing Jimin again wasn't just about reunion, it was about resurrection. The resurrection of something pure we thought was gone. Later that night, as she went to bed, she stopped at my door. "You look lighter these days," she said softly. "Maybe because you finally let love back in." She smiled and closed the door before I could reply. But she was right again. I stayed up for hours after that, scrolling through old photos, messages, and clips. There was one video of a performance from years ago where Jimin and I shared the stage. The camera caught a moment where we looked at each other and smiled mid-song, a small, unplanned smile that said everything without words. Watching it now, I understood what it really meant. It wasn't performance, it was truth. That night, before I fell asleep, I texted him again. "You should come by next weekend. Mom wants to make your favorite dish." A few minutes later, he replied, "If she makes it, I'll come running." I laughed quietly into the darkness, my heart full. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to heal. It already was. Maybe imperfectly, maybe slowly, but it was healing. My mom, Jimin, the group, me, we were all finding our way back, not through grand gestures or public moments, but through small acts of love that never stopped whispering, "You still belong here." And as I closed my eyes, I realized something my mom had been teaching me all along. Love isn't about going back to how things were, it's about growing into what they're meant to be next. The next week moved slowly, in the best way possible. I stayed home longer than I planned, part of me afraid that if I left too soon, the peace I'd found would fade back into noise. Every morning started the same. My mom humming in the kitchen, sunlight streaming across the floor, the quiet smell of home wrapping around me like an old song I'd forgotten the words to. I started helping her more, watering plants, fixing things, even cooking. She laughed when I nearly burned the rice. "You can command millions of fans," she said, "but not a single pan of rice?" I laughed too, and for a moment it felt like we were both kids again, me trying to prove something, her pretending not to worry. One morning, she looked up from the stove and said, "You know," Jimin called. I froze. "He did?" "Yes," she said casually. "He asked what you like for breakfast these days." She smiled. "He's coming by this weekend." My heart skipped. "He's coming here?" She nodded. "He said he promised you." That Saturday, I found myself pacing the living room. It was ridiculous. I've performed in front of millions, but waiting for that knock on the door made me nervous in a way no stage ever could. Then I heard it. 3 soft knocks. My mom got there first. When she opened the door, her face lit up. "Jimin, come in," she said, her voice bright, like the years had never passed. He bowed politely, smiled, and handed her a small bag. "For you," he said. "It's tea from Jeju." She took it, touched his arm gently. "You always bring something. You always feed me too much," he said, and they both laughed. I stood by the stairs for a second, watching them. It was like stepping into a memory, two people who'd always understood each other's kindness without effort. Then Jimin looked up and saw me. "Hey," he said quietly. I nodded. "Hey." It was simple, but it carried the weight of everything we hadn't said. We sat down for lunch together, the three of us. My mom kept talking, telling stories, filling the silence. We didn't yet know how to fill ourselves. But after a while, it became easy again. We laughed about old times, about ridiculous things that only made sense to us. Jimin still had that same laugh, loud, contagious, unguarded. My mom watched us with quiet joy in her eyes. I think she'd been waiting years for that sound to return. After lunch, we went outside. The sky was clear, the garden bright. My mom had planted new flowers, yellow, her favorite. She said they bloomed faster when people talked near them. "So keep talking," she told us, then went back inside. Jimin and I walked around the yard, stopping by the old tree where we used to sit whenever he visited. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was gentle. "Finally," he said, "your mom told me something before I left last time." I looked at him. "What?" "She said she doesn't pray for us to forget. She prays for us to remember kindly." That hit deeper than I expected. "She always says things like that," I said softly. "And she always means them." He nodded, staring at the ground. "You know, when I saw her cry that day, I realized how much love she held for all of us. It made me wonder if we ever gave that love back enough." I looked at him and said, "We were young. We didn't know how." He smiled faintly. "Maybe now we do." We stood there for a while, saying nothing. The breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint smell of earth and blossoms. Somewhere inside, I felt something shift, a quiet understanding that some people aren't just part of your story. They are the story. The people who shape the way you see love, who remind you that kindness can still exist in a world that demands so much hardness. Before Jimin left, my mom made him promise to come again soon. "Next time I'll make something special," she said. "You already did," he replied, smiling at her. When he turned to me, his expression softened. "Thank you for letting me come back." I shook my head. "You were never unwelcome." He nodded, and for a second it looked like he might say more. But he didn't. He just smiled the way he used to, and that was enough. I watched him walk away down the path, sunlight catching the back of his jacket. My mom came to stand beside me. "Feels lighter, doesn't it?" she said. "Yeah," I whispered. "It does." That night, I sat at my desk writing lyrics again for the first time in months. But this time, the words came easily. They weren't about loss or pain. They were about return, about finding home in people you thought you'd lost. I didn't even notice the tears until they fell onto the paper. They weren't sad tears. They were full, grateful ones. And when I finished, I realized that maybe this was what healing really looks like. Not grand gestures or perfect closure, but shared laughter in an old kitchen, sunlight in a garden, and the quiet truth that love, when it's real, always finds its way back home. The next morning, everything felt softer, like the world had been rewound to a time before things got complicated. The air outside smelled like wet grass. My mom's laughter floated through the house as she talked to someone on the phone. And for once, I didn't wake up to noise inside my head. Just peace. Real, gentle peace. I stayed in bed a little longer, listening to her voice, thinking about yesterday, about Jimin's visit, about how easily the years melted away the moment we stopped guarding our heart. Later, when I went downstairs, my mom was setting the table for breakfast. "You missed him," she said without looking up. I blinked. "Who?" "Taehyung," she answered, smiling. "He stopped by early this morning. Said he had something to drop off." I frowned. "He didn't even call me. He wanted to surprise you." Checked the kitchen counter. There, it was a small brown box with my name written on top in his handwriting. Inside, a framed photo of all 7 of us taken years ago, at the edge of the stage after one of our biggest concerts. Our faces were glowing with sweat and exhaustion, arms around each other, eyes bright with that kind of joy that only comes from survival. Underneath the photo, a note. We were never just a group. We were a promise, Don't forget that. I sat there for a long time, staring at it. Then my mom placed a plate in front of me. You should call him, she said gently. He said Jimin told him everything. He's proud of you both. After breakfast, I stepped outside to call Taehyung. The wind was warm, the kind that carries memories. When he answered, his voice was light, teasing. Did you cry already? He said. I laughed, almost. He chuckled. Good. That means it reached you. There was a pause. Then he added, You know, when Jimin told me he saw your mom again, I thought maybe it was finally time for all of us to stop pretending we've moved on. Because maybe we never did. His words echoed something I hadn't admitted even to myself. We had all gone our separate ways, chasing different dreams, but none of us ever really left. The bond wasn't broken, it was just quiet, waiting. That afternoon, I helped my mom tend to her flowers. The yellow ones Jimin had admired were blooming even more. She said it was because the soil had been waiting for the right season. Everything blooms again when the time is right, she told me. I thought about that for hours. That night, after dinner, I opened my laptop to work on music again. The lyrics that had been buried somewhere inside me for months finally started to flow. But they weren't about fame, success, or even heartbreak. They were about return, about forgiveness, about how love isn't something you lose, it's something you grow into. The song was called When You Came Home. I didn't overthink it. I just let it happen. A few days later, I sent a demo to Namjoon. I didn't even tell him what it was. He replied within an hour, This sounds like peace, Cook, like you found what you were searching for. Then he added, We should record it together. My chest tightened with a mix of excitement and nostalgia. It felt right, like the beginning of something new that was still somehow familiar. That weekend, we all met at the studio. The same one where it all began. Taehyung showed up first, guitar in hand. Jimin came next, holding iced coffees for everyone. Yoongi was already there, quietly setting up. When I walked in, Namjoon looked up from his notes and said, Let's make something honest. And for the first time in years, we did. The session went late into the night. Between takes, we laughed, reminisced, teased each other, and shared stories about the moments we never told the public, the fears, the doubts, the nights when we wondered if we'd made the right choices. But through it all, there was love. So much love. At one point, Jimin stood by the mic, eyes closed, singing one of the lines I'd written. His voice carried something that words couldn't. Forgiveness, gratitude, memory. My mom's face flashed in my mind, the way she had cried, the way she had smiled, the way she had seen all of this long before we did. When we finished recording, we sat together in silence as the final playback filled the room. The song ended with just our voices, unpolished, raw, real, no effects, no filters, just truth. Afterward, Jimin looked at me and said quietly, She'll love it. I smiled. Yeah, I think she already does. That night, walking home under the quiet soul sky, I realized something that would stay with me forever. Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, it redefines it. My mom's tears weren't about sadness or regret. They were about recognition. She saw the love that never really left, the bond that endured, even when the world changed around us. And I think deep down, she always knew that someday we'd all find our way back, not to who we were, but to who we were meant to become. A few weeks later, life settled into a rhythm. Again, calm, steady, familiar. The kind of rhythm that feels like breathing after you've held your breath for too long. I was back in Seoul full time now, preparing new music, reconnecting with people I hadn't seen in years. But no matter how busy things got, something inside me had changed. Every decision, every moment felt slower, more deliberate, like I was finally living with my heart instead of running from it. My mom called every morning. Sometimes she didn't even say much, just to ask if I'd eaten, or to tell me which flowers bloomed that day. But there was something healing in those calls. Her voice grounded me. I think she knew I was still learning how to exist in peace after so many years of noise. One morning, she said, Jimin dropped by again. My heart skipped. Really? She laughed softly. Yes, with Taehyung this time. They brought coffee. You've got good boys, Jungkook. That afternoon, I visited her. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it, that quiet warmth that only home can hold. My mom was setting out snacks, humming to herself, and there on the table were 2 coffee cups, half empty. They just left, she said. They said you'd be mad if they finished all the cookies. I smiled, shaking my head. They're still the same, she nodded. You all are. You just forget sometimes. Later that day, I walked down to the garden. The flowers had grown taller since the last time I saw them. The air smelled like sunlight and soil. I remembered what she said before, that everything blooms again when the time is right, and I finally understood. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, like petals opening one day at a time. That evening, Jimin texted me. Your mom said you're recording again. Is that true? I replied, yeah. You should come by the studio next time. There's something I want you to hear. He didn't reply immediately. Hours passed. Then, just before midnight, my phone buzzed again. I'll come. I owe her that much. The next day, he did. When Jimin walked into the studio, it felt almost like deja vu, the smell of coffee, the sound of instruments tuning, the quiet hum of something sacred about to happen. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. He sat down beside me, and I played the song we'd recorded, When You Came Home. The track filled the room like a heartbeat. When it ended, he didn't speak. He just looked at me, eyes glistening. That's her voice in there, he said finally. Not literally, but you can feel her. I nodded. She's the reason it exists. He looked down, smiled faintly. You know, when she hugged me that day, it felt like she forgave me for everything I didn't say. I swallowed hard. She didn't need an apology, Jimin. She just needed to see us both okay. He nodded. I think she knew before we did. For a while, we sat there in silence. Then I played another melody. I'd been working on something raw and unfinished. Jimin listened, then began to hum softly, his voice blending with the piano. It was instinctive, natural, like we'd never stopped. The room felt full again, alive in a way words couldn't explain. It wasn't about music anymore. It was about everything that music had carried for us all these years. Love, pain, distance, return. Afterward, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. You know, he said, I used to think closure meant walking away, but maybe it just means coming back differently. I looked at him. Yeah, maybe it means not forcing things to be what they were, just letting them become what they're supposed to be. He smiled, that quiet, peaceful smile I hadn't seen in so long. Then I think we're finally there. Later that night, my mom called again. He visited, didn't he? She asked. I smiled into the phone. Yeah, we made something new. She didn't ask what. She just said, that's good. Creation means your heart's still alive. After we hung up, I sat in the studio alone, listening to the hum of the machines, the faint echo of Jimin's voice still in the air. It struck me how fragile and miraculous time is. How people can drift so far apart and still find their way back, not because they plan to, but because love has a way of remembering what we forget. I thought about Taehyung's note. We were never just a group. We were a promise. Maybe that's what my mom had seen that day when she cried. Not the pain, not the distance, but the promise that love made before any of us even understood it. The promise that no matter how far we go, we always return to the ones who taught us what love looks like. Before I left, I saved a new track and named it The Promise My Mother Saw. And as I closed the laptop, I realized something I'd been missing all along. Love isn't proven by how loud you say it. It's shown in how quietly you keep it alive in a song, a text, a visit, a hug, or even in tears that say everything words can't. My mom's tears that day weren't just for the past. They were for the future she already believed in. And maybe now I do too. A few months later, everything began to align in ways I hadn't expected. Life didn't feel like a performance anymore. It felt like a quiet song only I could hear. My mom's health was good, her laughter louder, her garden brighter. I was still working, still writing, still searching for truth and melodies. But now, every lyric came from a gentler place. Not from pain, not from ambition, but from gratitude. And every time I sat at the piano, I thought about her, about Jimin, about all of us, the people who built something together, broke apart, and somehow found our way home again. One Sunday afternoon, I took her to see the studio. She hadn't been there in years. As soon as she walked in, her eyes softened. "It still smells the same," she said, "like hard work." I smiled. "Yeah, and maybe forgiveness too." On the wall hung the framed photo Taehyung gave me, the seven of us, together, untouched by time. She stopped in front of it, tracing the edges with her hand. "I prayed for this," she said quietly. "Not fame, not success, just this love that lasts." I wanted to tell her how much she taught me, how her quiet strength had shaped everything I am, but the words caught in my throat. So instead, I turned on the song When You Came Home. The studio filled with our voices, raw and imperfect, layered over the piano like a memory breathing again. My mom closed her eyes and smiled. "That's what love sounds like," she whispered. That evening, Jimin came by again. We didn't plan it, he just showed up, carrying fruit and his usual easy smile. "Your mom invited me," he said, laughing. "She called from the kitchen. I told you, he's like my other son." He grinned, shrugging. Can't argue with her. We all sat down together, sharing food and stories, the kind of laughter that doesn't need to be forced. And somewhere between the meal and the sunset, I realized this was it. The healing, the closure, the homecoming, it wasn't in grand apologies or long talks. It was in this quiet, ordinary peace. After dinner, my mom went upstairs, leaving us outside under the stars. The air was cool, the night calm. Jimin leaned back, looking up. "You know," he said, "I used to think love meant never leaving, but maybe it means always coming back." I looked at him and smiled. "You did come back. We all did," he said softly. Maybe that's what she saw all along. I thought about that for a long time. Maybe she did. Maybe that's why she cried that day. Not because she was sad, but because she already knew what we didn't. That real love never disappears. It just waits patiently for you to grow enough to recognize it again. Before he left, Jimin hugged me tight, steady, like no time had passed. "Tell her I'll visit again soon," he said. "She'll hold you to that," I replied. And as I watched him walk down the same path he once left by, I felt something unexplainable, like the story had finally closed its circle. Later that night, I walked into my mom's room. She was half asleep, light from the hallway falling across her face. "He came," I said quietly. Her eyes opened just enough to see me. "I know," she whispered. "I heard your laughter." I stood there for a while, just watching her breathe. And it hit me, her love had been the thread through everything, the unseen hand that guided every step back toward grace, the reason I could still believe in second chances. As I turned off the light, I thought about what she'd said before, that love doesn't end, it evolves. Maybe that's true for everything. Friendship, family, music, they all change shape, but their essence stays the same. And so I wrote one last line before I went to bed that night, a line I'll never forget. "Love is the sound of coming home, even when you thought you never could." Because that's what my mom's tears had really meant. Not loss, not regret, just love, finding its way back, quietly, faithfully, again and again. It was weeks later, and life had grown quiet again, but not the kind of quiet that feels empty. It was the kind that feels earned. The kind you arrive at after walking through years of noise, chaos, and misunderstanding. I'd started waking up earlier, drinking coffee with my mom before heading out, watching the light move across her garden. She said, mornings were the most honest part of the day. You can tell who you've become, she told me once, by how you treat the morning after pain. Her words stayed with me because I realized that every morning now felt lighter. Every small thing, her voice, the smell of her cooking, even the way the sun hit the walls reminded me that I had come back to something I'd almost lost, peace. One afternoon, I visited her friend's house with her, a woman who used to live next door when I was a child. She hadn't seen me in years, and when she did, she said, "You've grown into your father's quiet." I didn't know what that meant at first, but later, when I saw my mom looking at me with that same proud, soft smile, I understood. Quiet doesn't mean weak. It means grounded. It means you finally stopped running. That night, I found myself alone in the living room, scrolling through messages from the members. Jin had sent a photo from the base, him smiling with a peace sign. Hobie sent a short video of the sunset, with the caption, "For the days we missed." Namjoon had written, "Everything we are still belongs to the same song." Yoongi, simple as always, wrote, "Proud of you, kid." And Taehyung, with his usual depth disguised as humor, texted, "Your mom's garden deserves its own album." But Jimin's message came last. "Tell her I'll visit again next week. She says she'll teach me to make kimchi." I smiled. I could almost hear her laugh already. The following weekend, he came as promised. This time, it wasn't awkward or heavy, it was easy. Familiar. My mom had already set the table before he even arrived. When she opened the door, she said, "There you are. I've been waiting for my helper." He laughed, putting on an apron before she could even ask. Watching them in the kitchen was something I'll never forget. He chopped, she teased, and I stood in the doorway realizing I was witnessing love in its purest, simplest form, the kind that doesn't need to be named or explained. Later, when we sat down to eat, she looked at both of us and said, "You see, everything tastes better when people forgive each other." We both laughed, but I felt that truth settle deep inside me, because that's exactly what forgiveness does. It brings flavor back to life.